just it's on us as well because we shot it so long ago. It didn't even occur to me that it might not get there.
The thought that it wouldn't even make it.
Yeah, but I mean, everyone hustled and it's kind of worked out in the end. But yeah, it was just I couldn't believe it when I saw the track. Never mind. No, it's been good though. It's good to be here and figuring out like a lot more people didn't know us than I thought. But some of that's because of the park play and those things. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah.
No, reception's been great.
Great, I know it has been. I mean, especially all the meetup runs, all our train runs.
All right, it is 12 o'clock. We're going to get started with our next panel, fueling and hydration, and a very important topic for tomorrow and for endurance athletes in general. My name is Scott Abbott. I'm the executive director of the Sacramento Running Association. Thank you to those of us joining us and also on our live stream. The Sacramento Running Association, we are the organization that puts on the California International Marathon. So we've been working all year. There's a big weekend for us. And welcome all of you guys to this great achievement that you're going to try to do tomorrow. And we're going to talk fueling and hydration. I've got the CEO of Precision Fueling and Hydration, Andy Blow, with us here today. We are excited to have Precision Fueling and Hydration as the official fueling and hydration partner of the California International Marathon. Andy has a great background, accomplished sports scientist, background in Formula One racing with sports science, and then an accomplished triathlete himself at the Ironman level. And now he has dedicated himself to providing best-in-class fueling and hydration for endurance athletes at Precision Fueling and Hydration. And we are excited to have them on board and excited to have Andy here today. Welcome, Andy.
Thanks, Scott. Really pleased to be here.
All right, great. And so let's just talk fueling and hydration. Let's just start with the importance of fueling and hydration on the race course tomorrow. In my opinion, it's one of, if not the most important thing you all can do. We talked a lot about in our experts panels about focusing on things you can control. The things you can't control, like the weather, that's already been taken care of for you. It's going to be a beautiful day tomorrow. The training, that's already the haze in the barn. That's out of your control at this point. You've already done the work. But tomorrow, the things you can control are things before the race, obviously logistics, getting there on time and all that stuff. But once the race starts, there's two things you can control, and that's it. Your pacing and your fueling. And those are the two things that you can do to ensure you're going to have a successful race day. We'll talk about pacing later, but fueling is that other piece that is the most important thing that you can control on race day to have a great day. So talk a little bit about the importance and what this fueling and hydration plays in their effort tomorrow.
Well, when I first got involved in marathon running, it was through my dad, and he was running marathons in the 80s and 90s. And every time he ran a marathon, he'd stagger across the line looking, a bit worse for wear, having probably at most had half a banana on the way round. And it was just accepted that was what you did in a marathon. You just everyone was going to hit the wall at some point, and it was just waiting for it to happen. And if you look at how we approach it nowadays, it's totally changed. I think there's two massive reasons why marathons are getting faster, and that's super shoes and it's fueling. And both of them make a massive contribution if you get them right.
All right, so before we dive into tomorrow and during the race, let's just talk this final 24 hours leading up to the race. Fueling and hydration doesn't begin at the start line or when you take your first gel or whatever, but it begins now. So let's talk about things they can do over the next 24 hours on the fueling side and even on the hydration side to get ready to show up with their tanks full on the start line.
Definitely. Anyone who's here will have heard of the term carbo loading before. Carb loading's been around for decades. It was practiced in the 60s and 70s at first, and that was when marathon runners were trying to run the whole way without eating anything, so they wanted to start with their tanks as full as possible. And basically, if you carb load effectively, you can store enough energy to keep yourself going for over 90 minutes, maybe even close to 2 hours. So that was the old theory. You would store up and not eat during the run. Nowadays, what we try and do is you still try and carb load because it does benefit you from starting with lots and lots of energy stored in your muscles, but we also fuel on top of that as well. And the way that you carb load effectively is that in this last phase, so starting ideally from yesterday, 48 hours out, but you can continue it today, is you're trying to eat almost exclusively carbohydrate-based foods. So you start to reduce the fiber that you're eating, you start to reduce the fat and the protein, and you really increase the carbs. For the mathematically inclined, you want to be trying to eat around about 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight. So 10 grams for every 2.2 pounds of your body weight.
So what might that look like just practically here? I mean, we're at noon on Saturday here. We're talking about possibly, if they haven't had lunch yet, but I know what's probably burning in everybody's mind is dinner tonight. What does their plate look like tonight?
I think really it looks like you've pushed everything aside except for the rice or the pasta or the potatoes, and that's almost exclusively what you're eating. What I wouldn't do, though, is push it all into dinner tonight. You want to be eating carbohydrates all throughout the day today. And if you're someone who doesn't feel like you can tolerate a lot of food all in one go, consider using a sports drink or even drinking Coca-Cola or something like that, which has got a lot of sugar in it. It's really the 1 or 2 days prior to the race, or when you're going to eat like a toddler wants to eat all the time. It's beige foods, it's simple cereals, bagels, that kind of stuff, and just it's actually eating relatively unhealthy, but getting the carbs in.
Yeah, and I know another thing we always try to say on everything that you're doing, whether it's the clothes you're wearing, your pacing, your feeling, is not trying to do things too different than your normal diet, though. So it's applying the things you've been normally eating, but then kind of focusing on those items that are more the simpler carbohydrates and things. But yeah, you shouldn't be trying new foods that you haven't tried before. So is that correct?
Definitely not. Nothing new on race day, and nothing new the day before either.
And what about on the hydration side? Like right now, like how much should they be drinking? I mean, we already know what the weather is supposed to look like tomorrow, so what on the hydration side?
I think the biggest mistake people make with hydration before a marathon is actually they drink too much. They drink too much water. You see a lot of people walking around here with water bottles, which is not a bad idea, but you don't just want to be drinking and drinking and drinking until you're having to pee all the time, because what that does, that flushes a lot of electrolytes out of your body. You just want to drink relatively normally. You might drink a little bit more than you normally do today because you're going to be eating more carbs. And when you store carbohydrate, you store water with it. So an extra glass or two of water here and there isn't going to hurt. But what you don't want to be doing is trying to store up water like you are carbs. You can't store loads of extra water. You just end up peeing it out. So what we recommend is adding a little bit of extra salt to your food today, because that helps you retain the extra water that you drink. And also tonight and tomorrow morning, have one bottle, around 16 ounces, of a very strong electrolyte drink. What that does, you absorb the electrolytes into the bloodstream, it pulls fluid in with it, and it holds it there. So you aren't queuing up to use the restrooms like everyone else. You're better hydrated, but you're not flushing your system out. So basically, don't overdrink water.
That's great advice there. So we're actually getting some like unhealthy eating advice, adding salt and all these things. But you're right. In those final 24 hours, it's about getting your system ready to go and being fueled up. Now let's shift to tomorrow morning before they get on the bus. When they wake up, it's a kind of touchy thing. They're going to be out of their normal routine. Everything's shifted earlier. There's obviously, they got the nervous stomach and everything. What are the key pieces they can put in place in the morning before they arrive at the start line?
Yeah, so if you've carb loaded well, your muscles will be full of carbohydrate by the time you go to bed tonight, and overnight you're not going to burn through those carbohydrate stores. So your muscle glycogen levels are going to be topped up, and they're going to stay topped up. The thing that gets drained a little bit overnight is the carbohydrate store in your liver, because that feeds your blood sugar and that feeds your brain. So overnight, your brain's still active and you're still burning a little bit of that carbohydrate. So the aim of your breakfast in the morning is just to replace the carbs that you've burned overnight from your liver glycogen. And that's not too much. So if you've done a good job carbo loading the last 2 days, if you're someone who's got a bit of a nervous stomach, if you don't like eating a lot for breakfast, don't worry. As long as you get some carbs in, like a piece of toast, if you get a bagel, even if you can just get an energy drink first thing in the morning, that's usually enough to see you through up to the race start.
Okay, but let's just look at a practical timeline, though. Okay, let's say they're taking the bus from down here at 4:30 in the morning. They're trying to get out there at 4. That probably means like a 3:15 wake-up call. I don't know, depending on where you're staying. I know I'm freaking everybody out. You're not going to sleep that well tonight anyway, your anxiety. So yeah, you get up early. You're at the bus. Maybe they have that bagel or whatever in their hotel room. Should they take food with them on the bus? What about up at the start line? They might be up there for an hour or 90 minutes beforehand. a gel? What should they be doing up there just practically?
I would be taking a bottle of electrolyte drink with me to sure that I finish that around about 45, 60 minutes before the start. I'd be sipping on that throughout the morning. And then also I'd probably carry an energy bar or a couple of energy gels or energy chews, and making sure that I'm having those in that last period of time. And finishing off, if you're someone who has caffeine in the morning, I would, if you have a coffee normally, continue on and have a coffee like you normally would. And then I'd recommend having a caffeinated gel about 15 minutes before the start as your final little bit of energy. The sugars in that kick in after about 15 minutes, so they'll be kicking in just as you start. And then the caffeine takes about 45 minutes to peak in your system. So that's going to kick in after the first 5 or 6 miles, and you're going to get a little bit of a boost then as well.
It's great advice. So that caffeinated gel, maybe when you're in the corral at the start line, that's the last piece of that pre-race fueling to have your tanks fully on full when that race starts. Okay, so now the race starts. Let's talk in-race fueling at this point. There are 17 aid stations on course. All of those aid stations are hydration stations. They have water and precision electrolyte drink at those stations. And then 3 of the stations, miles 6, 13, and 21, are fueling stops. Those have fuel at them. They'll have precision gels at them, both caffeinated and regular. And then they'll also have chews there, precision chews. And then we'll have some fruit slices at those 3 aid stations. So those are the resources that are available to them on course. What is a fueling plan that can be successful for them during the race?
I think the first thing to remember about your fueling plan is that it needs to start early on, probably earlier than you would expect. If I was running the marathon tomorrow, I'd be taking my first gel after about 25 minutes. And I can guarantee you at that point, if you've had a good breakfast and you've carb loaded, you won't feel like you need a gel after 25 minutes. But you're not taking that gel for now. You're taking it so that you don't blow up later on. Most people are going to benefit from taking at least 2 gels an hour, which is 60 grams of carbohydrate an hour. And if you're one of the faster runners, some of the runners at the very front that we're talking to, CJ Albertson, who won the race last year, he's going to be taking upwards of 3 gels an hour, so nearly 100 grams of carbs. But
yeah, we actually had CJ on a panel yesterday, and he says he's going to take 7 gels tomorrow.
Yeah, and that's because what we're learning is that the faster you're running, the more carbohydrate you can take in. There is a positive dose-response relationship. You can take more in. You can not only run faster, but you'll recover faster after the race as well. So for carbs, I would say shooting for 2 gels an hour throughout the race is a good target for most people.
So 2 gels an hour. Now let's talk, maybe some of our runners that aren't CJ, he's going to take 7 gels, but if they're out there 4, 5, maybe 6 hours, and you're starting talking 2 gels an hour, working up to 50. Being able to take that many gels, are there other tools that they can have on the fueling side to kind of mitigate maybe like, hey, I can't get in another gel at this point?
Definitely. Yeah. The good thing is if you're running a little bit slower, then you have kind of more nutrition options, because CJ is not going to be in a position to be chewing down some energy blocks or some chews or having an energy bar. But if you're running a little bit slower, you can probably have something which is a bit more solid and mix it up. You might also find as well, progressively as the times get longer, you don't need quite as much per hour. So some people are going to be okay with 30, 45, 50 grams of carbs an hour if you're running a bit more slowly. And as I say, the faster you're going, the more you're going to want to dial that number up.
And again, the caveat we talked about before, not doing anything new on race day. So anything you're introducing in terms of your vessels to get these carbs should not be items that you haven't trained with, correct?
Definitely stick with what you know on race day.
So let's talk hydration. We talked about fueling, and there's 2 gels an hour. I'm sorry, that was 60 carbs per hour is what we're saying potentially. And then let's talk on the hydration side. How does that look?
So if you've preloaded well, if you've had that 16 ounces of an electrolyte drink before the start, you're going to be stood on the start line really well hydrated. And the weather conditions tomorrow don't look like they're going to be hot. It looks like they're going to be great conditions for running. That doesn't mean you're not going to sweat, but you're not going to sweat as much as you would, say, running a marathon in Florida in the summer. So your hydration can be adjusted accordingly. The biggest factor that will determine, again, how much hydration you need is probably your sweat rate, which is dictated a lot by the pace that you're running at. The faster runners we'll see tomorrow probably drinking something like 16, maybe 20 ounces of fluid an hour, maybe a little bit more than that. If they're really heavy sweaters, we'll see some people drinking as little as 8 or 10 ounces an hour if they're not a big sweater. And that should be something which you're largely doing by feel. You've got to figure out what's worked for you in training. You don't want to be drinking when you're not thirsty, but you also don't want to be just ignoring thirst. So it's about listening to your body, drinking frequently. There are 17 aid stations on the course where you can pick drinks up. Listen to your body and see how much you feel like you need, and you'll probably be taking on enough in these conditions.
And just a note about the aid stations, we talked about 17 aid stations, just to let you know what they look like when you're approaching them. Again, the hydration stations, which is all 17 aid stations, the electrolyte drink, the precision hydration drink will be the first thing available at those aid stations. The volunteers will be saying electrolyte as they hand those cups out. Then water will be the last thing that's available. There's also porta potties and medical at all aid stations as well. But so it's electrolyte drink first, water last. If it's a fueling stop, the first thing that'll be available are the gels. They'll come before the hydration. So gels, and then the chews and fruit, and then into the hydration products. Again, electrolyte and then water always last. So talk about like just the logistics of aid stations and any hacks for navigating those and how to get that fuel and hydration in.
Definitely. When you're coming up to an aid station, the first thing is when you see it, when you're approaching it, if you know you're going to want to take something from that aid station, make sure you're moving across to that correct side of the road. What you don't want to be doing is swerving in front of other people or having to cut across other people, because that's going to annoy them and it's going to risk tripping up.
Yeah, let me hop in on that. All the aid stations will be on the right-hand side of the road, except for our first 2 aid stations. Because it's just bigger crowds, they'll be on both sides of the road at those first 2 aid stations. Then after that, they're always going to be located on the right-hand side of the road.
And then I think what you've got to do is figure out what you're going for. If you're going for a gel, that's going to be the first thing that's at those fuel aid stations. And what I would say is pick out a volunteer that you can see holding a gel out, make eye contact with them, make sure they've seen that you're looking at them, and then make a beeline for that person. That way you're more likely to get a decent handoff. If you try and grab something at the last minute, they might not be ready and you might not be ready. So look ahead. Don't be afraid to even point or wave at them. Make sure they know I'm coming for you. And then you'll have a much better chance of success.
And on the gels, I mentioned that there's caffeinated and uncaffeinated at all 3 of those stops. Again, miles 6, 13, and 21. The volunteers will be audibly telling you whether they have a caffeinated gel or uncaffeinated. Is there anything in the packaging where they can see the difference as well?
Yeah, so the gel, the standard gel is predominantly black, and then the caffeinated gel has a bronze strip around the middle. So that's one of this man at the front here has got one of the non-caffeinated gels. And we've got the chews as well in those packets. They haven't got any caffeine. The caffeinated gels have a bronze strip and they say 100 milligrams on the front there.
And you can head on over to the Precision booth here and check out all the products and see what those look like as well. So yeah, we've got the fuel and hydration plan. We've talked about the aid stations. We talked about making eye contact with the volunteers. What about like just drinking on the run? That could be something that's challenging for people at these aid stations. Any hacks there?
Yeah, I would say when it comes to drinking, especially drinking out of cups on the run, the number one tip is to, instead of holding the cup from underneath, when you grab it, hold it and then move your hand on top, squeeze the cup so that it just creates a bit of a slit, and then you can drink from the corner there so you're not throwing it all over your face. If you are trying to get hydration in as well, don't be afraid just to slow your pace a little bit. It's better to just slow down, not be gasping so you're not getting a load of air in with the water. You'll only lose a few seconds and you'll gain that back by being well hydrated and feeling stronger later on. So take your time and don't feel like you've got to drink it all within 10 meters of picking it up. You can grab that drink, you can carry it for a moment, squeeze the cup and then have a sip and then be relaxed about it, and then you'll stand much better chance of taking it in and not making yourself feel sick.
Yeah, and I'll make a note too about that. Just one thing we ask of the runners, it just helps us, obviously trying to curate this event for this community, 26 miles of roads. From a trash perspective, try to, get it near one of our trash cans at those aid stations. There'll be trash cans that'll laid out past the aid station for, a ways. You can use all those. We have signs at the final one saying these are the last trash cans, so that's your last chance to drop it. If you do take a gel midway through between aid stations, just try to hold on to it till you get to an aid station and then drop your trash there. It just makes it easier for us to get this course cleaned up and then obviously leave the streets of Sacramento better than we found them. So that's just kind of a note about the trash there. Let's talk about the intersection between pacing and fueling. I started with that. Those are the two things they can control out there on course: their pace and their fuel. Just can we talk a little bit about the intersection of those two?
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really important one. If you go out a little bit too hard, which a lot of people do in marathons, especially because I heard this one has a lovely fast start for the first 5 or 6 miles.
Well, first of all, I'm going to stop right there. This group's not going to go out too hard because they're going to follow the instructions that we've provided them and all the expert panels, and they're going to run the right pace. It's going to feel too fast. They're going to slow down. So this group I'm not worried about, but other people out there that might go too hard.
Yeah. Well, for any of those poor people that do get a little bit carried away with the excitement tomorrow, they've got to remember that if you run a bit faster than your training suggests you might be able to hold, you're going to be becoming more and more inefficient. So you're going to sweat more, and you're also going to burn more calories. So one of the things you can do, apart from checking your splits and convincing yourself that you're better off settling in and slowing down, is you're going to try to fuel a little bit more and a little bit more frequently, because at least that's going to help offset some of that extra energy that you're burning. So the worst thing that you can do, which often happens to, as you say, Scott, not these people, but other people running marathons, is not only do you go out a little bit hard, but then you kind of get carried away and think you're feeling great and think you don't need to fuel and drink as much. And you're getting a double negative effect there, because you're going faster than you can sustain and you're burning energy at a rate faster than you're used to. And so then if you don't step up your fueling, if you don't step up your hydration, those last 6 miles coming into town are going to be quite painful.
Yeah, there's a discipline to those early parts of a marathon on both sides of it. The race is easy at that point. I mean, the marathon pace for everybody that's trained effectively is going to feel fairly relaxed. And so you have to be very disciplined when things are easy to really stick to key things, stick to your pacing, even though it feels easy. Check down, make sure you stay in the right pacing. But at the same time, when stuff's easy, you don't feel like you need to hydrate and you need to fuel. But the discipline about pacing right early on and fueling early before things get tough is going to be what's going to save you. Because when things get difficult, it sometimes gets too hard. You can't wait till you're underfueled and bonking or underhydrated and dehydrated at that point, and then try to crash and get a bunch of fuel and hydration in. Or at the same point, when you're bonking on pacing, you can't go back and try to slow your early miles down. So you have to be so disciplined early in the race to stay on your pacing, but most importantly, get that fuel and get that hydration in early, because that's really what's going to set you up for a great back half of the race.
Definitely. I think if you're someone who typically isn't great at getting your fueling on a schedule, I'd advise having your watch beep. Set a timer on your watch that just repeatedly beeps, whether that's 25 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever it is. And then you don't have to have a gel exactly on that timer, or you don't have to have a drink, but it'll be a reminder to you to think, when was the last time I had one? Because if you get out to the fact where you've been running for 40 minutes or more and you've not had any energy, you've not had any fluids taken on, then you're probably starting to push the limits then.
Yeah, and for most of the running we do, we're running a lot of 45-minute hour runs. We don't take gels, and so we're not used to having gels at 30, 40 minutes into runs, and so it is important. And then also one of the things we've talked about is fueling can also be a way to break the race up. Like, you got to think about the daunting task of running 26 miles and being out there for 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. And when you kind of focus on gel to gel, these are the segments that you're running. Like, hey, I'm running to the next aid station. I'm going to run till I take my next gel. You're focusing on those 30, 40-minute blocks. And the next thing you know, you're in East Sacramento and the Capitol's coming up, and you've done it. So that's a way to really use fueling as a way to kind of break the race up and focus on those segments, the fueling segments. Hey, I want to get a gel in, and then 30 minutes, I'm going to run this block, and I'm going to stop at 2 aid stations and get drinks in. And so use your fueling plan as kind of a way to kind of chop the monster, the big elephant up of 26 miles.
Yeah, I think that having that that plan set up and making sure that you know the milestone that you've got to hit, ticking them off. It's part of the process of getting to the finish line, because it feels like a long way. 26.2 miles is a long way. It feels like a long way if you don't chunk it down like that. So, working through the 17 individual stations and the 3 that are at 6, 13 and 21 miles where you can get the fuel, that's all part of the mental game of helping you get to the finish line.
Yeah, and so I definitely, this topic is so personal for a lot of people. Everybody's got different plans, and you've got such great expertise. I want to allow time for questions from this body, questions you have about your individual fueling, especially if it doesn't maybe align with what's out there on course. We can try to help answer those questions for you and help you set up to have a great day. So if there's any questions, here's the time. You got a great resource right here in Andy Blow.
I got you.
Hello. I just had a question about the caffeine. You said 15 minutes prior. Would you recommend taking it additionally throughout the race, maybe halfway or? Yeah.
So if you're going to take caffeine beforehand, I would recommend having a coffee with your breakfast, if that's what you normally do, a caffeine gel about 15 minutes before, and then 1 or 2 more caffeine gels throughout the race. That's a reasonable dosage. So the caffeine gels have 100 milligrams of caffeine in them each, and 2, maybe 3 caffeinated gels is a reasonable dose for most people to have throughout the duration of the race. The thing about caffeine is it does take 45, maybe even 60 minutes to peak in your bloodstream. So certainly if you're running a little bit quicker, taking it slightly earlier in the race, the caffeine gel, you could pick one up at mile 21, but you're not going to get as much benefit from that as you will from taking it around halfway, to sort of 15, 18 miles, that kind of mark.
Okay, so basically, if you took your goal time and subtracted 45 minutes, from the finish time, and then 45 minutes back, and then maybe would that be ideal? If you're, because I was only planning on taking one in the middle, but now I actually think I should probably take one in the beginning and then probably 2 times throughout.
Yeah, if you took one at the beginning and then take another one when you think you've probably got about an hour left to run, then that's going to mean that you're going to get the most effect from the caffeine in the last 2 or 3 miles when you're going to need it most. So that's probably, if you're going to take 2 caffeinated gels, that is what I'd do. 1 before the start and 1 with about an hour to go.
Okay. And not 3. So not 3?
You can take 3.
Oh, okay.
Different people have different levels of tolerance for caffeine. What I wouldn't do is take more than you've practiced with, because you don't know how your body's going to respond.
Okay.
I'm like a caffeine junkie. I'm like coffee all day and have a soda problem myself. So I'd probably be caffeinated gel at every stop. So, but I think the point is, if you're not somebody and you're using caffeine just as an aid on race day, you don't want to be going over the top with that. So, question. I know we had a question right up here in front. Oh, same question about caffeine. So.
Hi, yes. I've been using the electrolyte capsules as well during my training. Does it hurt at all if I have those in addition to the drinks as well on the course?
Yeah, so the electrolyte capsules have about 250 milligrams of sodium in each of them. If you're someone who needs a lot of electrolytes, I probably need about 1,500 milligrams per liter because I have a very high sweat rate and I lose a lot of salt. So I would take 1 of those capsules for every sort of 3 or 4 cups of the electrolyte drink I have on course.
Right.
So as long as you're making sure you're washing them down at an appropriate ratio to what you've practiced in training, you'll be absolutely fine. For people who lose a lot less sweat or aren't as salty, they wouldn't need them, and they'll probably be better off taking a combination of the electrolyte drinks and then having some water.
Okay.
The biggest sign you'll get in your body that you're taking too much electrolyte on is you'll feel like you're craving plain water, because you're getting too salty and your body's telling you to dilute it down. So if you find yourself craving plain water, then back off on the electrolyte capsules, have some water and let your body settle down.
Okay, thank you.
We answer all the questions?
I guess so.
No question. Yes,
Here we go.
So I do this quite a bit. I get to the last 2-3 miles, and my mind says, "You're done. Slow down. Take it easy," and I can't break away from that. I'm not sure if other people go through that and stuff, but any ideas to?
I do that. That happened to me too. Like when I think 26 miles is so big, and you get to like 23, and you're like, I'm pretty much there, and you kind of let your guard down. But then you also got to think, like, if you were going to run a 5K race, like that's still 5 kilometers to go. Like that's a big thing to do. So you got to kind of keep staying in the moment and don't like step away from executing like mile to mile and get to that point where you let your guard down late in the race. Because like 5 miles or 4 miles is still a long run relatively, even though it's a small portion of a marathon. So that's my advice: is just kind of stay in the moment, keep running mile to mile, and don't think too about the finish line too early. But Andy, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, whenever I'm doing a race these days, because I don't know if you have one, but if you have a GPS watch that gives you a mile split or a kilometer split, I have my watch set up so it gives me a mile split every mile. And what I always try and do is I'm literally running from mile to mile. I know what my goal time is, and I want to hang on to those times. And it's kind of for me, it's like a source of pride that you're finishing the last mile at least as fast, if not faster than you did your first mile. So I always make that a target. So I'm trying to pace it even, but just trying to egg myself on to push that last 2 or 3 miles rather than settle in and slow down. And I think if you can set your mind up like that you're going to challenge yourself to do your last mile faster than your first mile, then that's a good thing to keep an eye on.
I think everybody's dialed in, Scott.
Questions. That's great. And just to note, make sure you're aware of what's offered on course. And if you're going to be using anything else, just have a plan. I think more than anything in all these panels we're talking about is have a plan. Take the information that's provided to you, go home tonight or back to your hotel room and set your plan up, your logistics plan for the morning, your fueling plan for the race, your pacing plan, and just have it all laid out and ready to go. If you have a plan, you execute your plan, you're more than likely going to have a great race day. So any final thoughts, Andy, for the group?
I think one of my final tips is that if you consider carrying an extra energy gel or an extra energy chew with you from the start, one that is kind of, you wouldn't actually put it in glass and smash it in case of emergency, but that's what it's there for. I would always have one extra one up my sleeve, as it were, because if you miss one at an aid station or you drop one or something like that, it can be very comforting. They only weigh about 40 odd grams each. It's not going to slow you down, but if you need it, if you end up being out there a little bit longer than you thought, it can be very comforting to know that you've got something that can help get you out of trouble. So pack an extra one in your shorts tonight.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, let's give a round of applause for Andy Blow, CEO of Precision Fueling and Hydration, for his great expertise here today, but also a thank you to Precision and Fueling and Hydration for providing all the products, being the official partner of the California International Marathon, and all the work that they've done to provide best-in-class resources for you guys on course tomorrow. Thank you, guys. Hey, and good luck out there. I'll see you at the finish line. When the fueling and hydration is done, I'll meet you in the beer garden for the rehydration time, right? All right, thank you, guys.
Thanks. Right. Good luck, everyone.
All right, good job, Scott. And Scott, I'll actually be back. Coming up next will be at 1:30.